The Collapse video series is for entertainment purposes only. Do not commit acts of violence.
One year after the collapse. The military begins going from town to town commandeering supplies. They do not take absolutely everything, but anything is too much. The government mistakenly thought there would be more. The leaders in power are mostly city people who, like most people from the city, think farms occur in the country with little or no effort and that hunting is plentiful and easy. The military attempts to communicate to the government that the people in the country are barely surviving, but their communiques are ignored or minimized. The country people don't fight back because they don't know how. The military is too big. If one unit is defeated, more will come. But the country people are working on the problem. The government genuinely thinks that what it's doing is what's best for the country as a whole. Their priorities over the past year were to get the electric grid back up, prevent foreign invasion, prevent nuclear meltdowns, they only failed with one nuclear plant, and maintain enough government to rebuild. They had also tried to maintain order and provide humanitarian help, but quickly realized that wasn't possible. Now that the grid is fairly operational, the gas pumps are working, and the chaos seems to have passed, they are anxious to get things back to normal and get everyone back to work. They see the collection and redistribution of goods as essential to that. While the grid is up, it's not reliable. A functioning grid is a delicate balance between incoming electricity from the power plants and outgoing electricity to the consumers. There is now a fraction of the consumers the system was designed for. To make matters worse, the lines have not been maintained for a year. Weather has damaged lines in various places, as it always does in a normal year, but no one has been out to perform repairs. There are really too many lines to maintain for it to be practical at this point. A lot of redesign and rerouting needs to be done to adjust to the population changes. It's a monumental task. Some downsizing happened when they were putting the system back up, but much more needs to be done. The engineers are struggling to figure out how to keep the lights on while they make the adjustments. In the meantime, the power system is working sometimes and not working sometimes. The seed factories producing genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, are restarted, but it's already May. The window of opportunity for spring planting has passed. There are additional windows for plantings later this year, but the seeds cannot be produced domestically fast enough. Seeds are not created overnight. It takes time. The government was expecting to find seeds in the warehouses that were produced before grid down, but enterprising looters have taken what they could carry and have been selling them to the towns. This group of seed dealers plans for the seeds to support them for several years so they don't sell all at once. The looters did not get all the seeds from the warehouses. It's a lot for them to carry. But the seeds that remain are far fewer than the government was hoping for. The government was not able to find many people still alive with the expertise to run the seed factories. Experts from Europe have been brought in. For this year's crop, Europe has donated enough for a moderately sized crop with the agreement that Europe get its share. The military had taken possession of the oil rigs and refineries. They've been making gasoline for themselves and the government. A small amount was sold abroad, but there was too much supply line disruption to sell at the usual scale. Many of the oil extraction facilities fell into disuse. Restarting them is not so simple. Not using them actually damages them. This is why the price of oil went negative in April of 2020 when demand for oil suddenly dropped due to lockdowns. Producers had to keep producing or risk damage to their sites, but there was nowhere to store that much oil that wasn't being consumed. Last year during the collapse, they had no choice but to stop producing. The US and Canada will not be able to instantly start producing at the previous scale. It will take several years to perform the repairs and return to prior production levels. Now that it appears that the governments of the US and Canada have regained control of the interior, or are at least on the verge of doing so, several countries have offered assistance in rebuilding. The offers come in from Russia, China, Japan, Turkey, the UK, and others. What they really want is access to the vast natural resources of North America. Oil, farmland, timber, fertilizer, fisheries, precious metals. US and Canada thank them for their generous offers, but they are already working with Europe, the country that provided meaningful help in building new transformers for the grid and getting them in place. Only the new offer from the UK is accepted due to long-standing historical ties with the UK. Though there is some doubt about how much the UK can help, as it has had more trouble getting back on its feet than Europe. As the US Navy is still very strong, the countries whose assistance was politely declined do not attempt to force their presence. Britain did better than North America this past year, but not by much. Because it's not part of the European Union, it did not benefit from the large purchase of discounted goods from China the protector made immediately after grid down. It cannot produce enough food for itself, leaving Britain with food shortages that destabilized the nation. It was able to sell oil to buy food, but only through substantial cuts in domestic oil usage that severely impacted the economy, and even then, there was still not quite enough food. Britain made some additional money using its formidable navy to escort cargo ships through pirate-infested waterways. Food shortages hit the cities the hardest, leading to violent conflicts between city people and country people. Hundreds of thousands died, either from starvation or from the violence. The deaths as a percent of total population were small compared to North America, but the impact on society was nonetheless severe. Through it all, the government managed to keep society from disintegrating completely. It is now hoping to leverage its historical ties to North America to gain access to food. The entire world is anxious for the potash mines in Canada to start producing again. Potash is the basis for potassium fertilizers, one of several essential inputs for modern agriculture to achieve the yields the world has grown accustomed to. Before the collapse, the world's largest potash producer was Canada, producing a whopping 30% of global exports. The Canadians running the mines perished except for a few. Europe sends some of its experts from potash mines in Germany and Spain. They set about getting it running again. Once that happens, they will face a transportation challenge. The worldwide potash shortage is most notable in Brazil and Australia, which had been producing a large portion of the world's food supply after the loss of the US and Canadian exports. They had reserves in storage when the supply evaporated, but those reserves are now depleted. Canada was not the only global supplier, but there is fierce competition for what is now on the market, with the producing countries, China, Russia, Belarus, Europe, and a few others, keeping most of it for themselves. Some producers, such as Israel, have had production disrupted by war. Brazil and Australia are facing a crash in agricultural yields from the potash shortage. This will make the global famine worse. Piracy has become rampant. Millions of fishers and private boat owners who had never engaged in piracy before hit the waters in the hopes of getting food to feed their families or any other goods they could sell for food. Despite the inexperience of the new pirates, cargo ships had trouble defending against them simply because of their sheer numbers. Over time, the pirates who weren't killed in struggles with ship crews got better and better at what they did. They used some of their proceeds to buy firearms and surveillance equipment. The Strait of Malacca between Indonesia and Malaysia is one of the hardest hit by pirates, having a major impact on shipments of oil and fertilizer from the Middle East to the Far East and Australia. The governments of Indonesia and Malaysia are quietly involved. Japan, concerned about securing its food supply from Australia, decides to intervene. It sends its navy to restore order in the Strait of Malacca. There is a tense standoff between the Indonesian Navy and the Japanese Navy, but ultimately Indonesia accepts that as good as its navy is, Japan's is better. It backs down in exchange for a higher cut of what passes through the strait. Europe goes to war with Russia. When the Russian army advanced into Poland, the Protector determined that Russia must be stopped. Knowing that Russia was paying for its invasion with exports of food, fertilizer, and fuel to the rest of the world, the Protector orders the military to bomb the southern Russian ports. He sends the French and Italian navies north to create a blockade of Russian cargo ships from passing by Denmark. The Protector then sends notice to Putin that he does not wish to take Russia or force it to return the countries it has already conquered. He only wants to stop the advance. As long as Putin thinks the Russian heartland is safe, he won't use nuclear weapons. The damage to Russian exports is immediately felt in the Russian economy, but it is also felt around the world by countries that planned to purchase Russian food, oil, and fertilizer. Plague is spreading in Rome. An Italian sailor on a cargo ship had been careless about plague prevention protocols when the ship was refueling and resupplying in Africa. When he returned to Italy, he left the ship and went home, already experiencing severe flu-like symptoms, and his lymph nodes were badly swollen. His mother sees him and takes him directly to the emergency room, where he sits for 3 hours in a room full of people before he is eventually seen. The young and inexperienced doctor misdiagnoses him with pneumonia and fails to take isolation protocols. The next morning, the nurses alert the doctor that the patient's fingers, toes, and nose are turning black. The doctor realizes the mistake he made.